So our last section is going to be on the commercial revolution, and it's actually related to both the new monarchs and the age of exploration, just because it's through these new monarchies where um, a lot of discoveries and colonies are going to be established, and from that, there's also going to be a new way for the economy to come back and bounce back from the Middle Ages. So we're going to be looking at what are the causes of the commercial revolution, and what are some of the features and the impact of the commercial revolution upon European society. So I'm not going to explicitly say how did the commercial revolution affect Europe politically, economically, socially, but you need to think about that yourself. Okay, so think about that. Try to keep that in mind as we go through the information. Some things I'll mention. Okay, so for the commercial revolution, there's an economic readjustment that's happening in Europe. Essentially, you're going to see global trade accelerate, and new goods and techniques are going to be involved. And so it's really like a recovery from the Middle Ages, because population is going to get better, right? And how they actually trade and buy and sell, and just the value of goods is going to kind of come back again with long distance. Several features that are really important to the commercial revolution are going to be new ocean trade routes, population growth, and then also inflation, which is rather slow, as well as commercial capitalism is going to be coming as a transition. Okay, so I'm going to break this down like for each one. Trade routes, as you know, explorers go upon these different routes, and eventually you have the triangle of trade established, and also the Columbian exchange established. And spices are really important. Different types of crops like sugar becomes very profitable, and especially mining those precious metals of gold and silver. And so from all of these types of trade, European trading nations that actually are part of the age of exploration are going to become more wealthy because of this. And with that wealth, they're going to invest that money to make them more wealthy. So it's kind of like a cycle. Okay, population growth is going to increase over time. In 1500, the population is going to be around 70 million, but by 1600, it's going to hit around 90 million, to the point where it's kind of like where it's like pre-plague, right? So because the plague had a huge hit on the population throughout Europe, right? This is about the time where finally the population is about to rise again, coming out of the plague. So there's still a steady amount of how towns are in size, but in the rural areas, we're going to see more population growth. And because new foods are also introduced, that's why population will grow through the Columbian exchange. Now, very simply, we have to understand this concept. When population grows, essentially that means that more people need more goods, right? Because there's more people and more mouths to feed, more clothes to wear, that sort of thing, more services needed. And so that's why that will also affect the prices. Okay, so there's this thing called the price revolution, and essentially it's saying that with a greater demand of food, because there's more people, there's more money that's going to be circulated, which also means that there's going to be a higher price, right? If everyone wants to buy a loaf of bread, well, if I'm a baker, I can sell it for more because they will buy it for more, right? And so essentially, prices of everyday commodities are going to go up, but it's not like going to skyrocket. Okay, so we have to understand that there's inflation, which means that over time prices are going to be going up, even though the value of money is kind of going down a little bit. But it's very gradual and slow. It's really important you understand during the price revolution. This has happened within the commercial revolution because of a gradual increase. Now, why is it gradual? Partially it's because the increase in population has been gradual, although it is a steady increase as well. Okay, so from all the gold and silver that's coming from the New World, that also will affect the prices to go up, but the main reason is because of population growth, not because of more gold that's coming in from the New World. That's like a secondary factor. Okay, know that what is primary and what is secondary, because AP is going to ask you which is the number one reason as to why prices went up during the 16th century. Okay, so understand population growth is more important. So a lot of commercial enterprises that are kind of importing different goods or exporting things, they're going to increase prices because merchants want to make that money, but kings also are going to be able to tax that profit from the merchants, and they will have better tax revenue. Okay, the commercial revolution is going to see a rise in capitalism. Now, it's not the same type of capitalism as we're familiar with in America, because this type of capitalism is more nation-centered. Our capitalism is still very free and open. However, the capitalism that was focused during the commercial revolution is very much for the economy of the country, as well as certain types of traders and merchants. The difference in the rising capitalism is that before it used to be very town-centered, like certain types of towns actually wanted to make profit for themselves, but nations now are actually looking to bring a more centralized economy. Okay, there's the medieval system of guilds, right? And then you have certain regulations that masters are going to set, and because of that, they didn't make much profit in a guild system. And so, with little profit means that they don't have a lot of investment either. And capitalism is all about investment, right? I'll put down 50 bucks if I know next week it's going to make me 100 bucks. So with little profit, little loss, right? No, it's not a risk to take, not an investment to take. But also that means that there's going to be little innovation. If I'm putting money down, 50 bucks down now for 100 bucks next week, it's because I believe in this idea, this innovation, right, of possibly making me more money. So the guild master actually has no capital to invest. And so with no capital, he can only work day to day, not really having the ability to produce future orders. And so he doesn't actually try to make a profit for himself later on. But then this brings us to a new individual, right? New types of social class, and that's the entrepreneur. Okay, and the entrepreneur are very much part of the bourgeoisie, and this is kind of like their prime time to shine, right? This is their golden hour. Most entrepreneurs are going to start as a merchant, but eventually develop into bankers. Okay, entrepreneurs are basically risk takers who have capital, and they develop a business through that, right? And so the Medici family and the Fugger family from Germany, they are going to be the ones as the examples to entrepreneurs. Okay, so the Fuggers were from a small town. They were started as weavers, but essentially they found a way to create a new cloth. And when he went to Venice, right, the Fugger family went to Venice, they got into spice trading. And from spice trading, they got into silk trading. And over time, they're going to gain a lot of profit from the trade that they make. And from a weaving to a trading family, they've now become an investing banking family, right? And so they're actually going to get into banking and investing into mining and that kind of stuff. And by lending money to royalty, to nobility, to the clergy even, the banking family are going to make a lot of money. And so the Fugger family was actually able to loan money to Charles V, the King of France, right? Sorry, the King of Spain. And so when you're loaning money to the king, right, that's like not just like a couple bucks, but it's a huge sum. Okay. Eventually, the Fugger family is also going to be bankers to the Habsburgs dynasty, and financing even other Portuguese traders and explorers. Okay. One other thing that entrepreneurs would do is that they would come up with a domestic system, also known as the putting out system. What they wanted to do essentially is that because guilds were so restrictive, the domestic system was where these entrepreneurs are going to put out work, right? They're going to buy the raw materials. They're going to go into rural areas, right? And they're going to put out this work and saying, hey, please spin for me this wool, right? And then I'll bring that, and then you send that to the weavers. Please weave this spun wool, and essentially they will have, in the end, all this fabric, right? And so they go from investing their capital into raw materials, and then they find laborers outside of the guild, and this is where they can kind of like bypass the guild that were so restrictive to make a profit. Okay, and so what's going to happen is that it's going to make an impact on the increase of production of manufactured goods, because they are the ones with capital that are starting this up. If they did not have the capital to start this up, essentially these domestic workers that live in their homes in the cottage industry, right, the domestic system, they're not going to be able to, start spinning the wool. They're not going to be able to weave the spun wool, and they couldn't make a product to sell later on. So later, the entrepreneur is going to come back in a couple months and say, "Oh, I'll have to pick up all the wool. Here's your pay. Thank you for working," and they're going to sell that for profit. And that's what a businessman is, right? All right. So bankers, essentially, as I mentioned with the Fugger family, they're going to lend money for a profit based upon interest. Interest rates are actually really crazy, and it still works now. That's how banks make their money. It's based upon interest. If you don't pay your bills, that's how they charge you, right? And so during this time, bankers would even make 30% a year upon big lumps of loans, right? And so during the Middle Ages, this was actually looked down upon to actually have such high interest rates, and that's what we call usury, USURY, right? To have money lending at such a high interest that they look down upon that, saying that, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, right? But banking is going to expand throughout Europe, and over time, competition was going to cause interest to drop, but interest is going to be accepted amongst any type of loan, right? And so I need you to remember two major cities. One is Antwerp, which is in Belgium, and they're going to be the major financial center, banking center in the 16th century, right? And the second is going to be Amsterdam, which is in the Netherlands, and that's going to be in the 17th century, okay? And so they are the financial centers. That's really important for you to know, because they'll ask you, like, which is the financial centers, and that's where a lot of the wealth was going in to, right, from the New World, okay? So the idea of this commercial capitalism is really based upon the new goods that are basically the crops, right, the spices, the metals and stuff, a lot of natural resources, raw materials, and some services. Later, we're going to get into industrial capitalism, which it's going to be very much machine-based instead of like human labor, okay? Here you have Jacob Fugger, who is starting, as an entrepreneur, and then you have this woodcut of a merchant in the 1500s in Augsburg, Germany, and Germany is going to be a great center of commerce, and you have a lot of people that are loading wares in the background, like at port, and they're loading it onto the ship, okay? All right, from the Commercial Revolution, a really important concept is mercantilism, okay? Mercantilism is an economic theory that the new monarchs are going to establish, okay? A lot of this commercial capitalism is going to be used by nations, and if you can imagine an analogy, nation building, right, creating a nation, establishing a nation, a country, was to new monarchs as mercantilism is to economics, okay? And so the idea was that they're going to try to centralize their economies more, these monarchs are, and it's going to bring a decline to early commercial centers, especially like Venice, right? Portugal as a country, Spain as a country is going to, beat them out in the trading, and they're going to bring in, right, the slaves and the metals from the New World, and from that, right, they are going to be more wealthy. Bullion, as I mentioned in class, right, kings are going to try to acquire as much gold and silver as possible to have maximum wealth, and they are from that going to basically rid local trade. Not completely, but their goal is to like take that money that local traders are having and put it into their national economy, so their kingdoms are flowing with wealth. Also, something that they want to have is a self-sufficient economy, that they don't have to be relying upon other countries, but they themselves know how to run their own economy that will generate more wealth for themselves. So what are they going to do? They're going to increase the exports, right? I'm going to ship out more goods and limit the imports. All right, and this is what we call a balance of trade, okay? So the balance of trade essentially is saying that we would want to make sure that we take other people's gold and silver by selling all of our goods. We do not want to buy other people's goods more than we are selling them, okay? Because if we buy their goods, we're essentially giving away our gold and silver, and that's dumb, right? And so let's pay out as little as possible, and let's even use our colonies to our advantage, right? Colonies are not there to be respected and saying, oh, they're equal to us. No, colonies are exploited and saying, we're taking your raw materials and we're going to export these manufactured goods to the colonies, and they're going to buy it. And once they buy it, we're going to take more of that profit from the gold and silver. Okay, so what's going to happen is that these protectionist policies are going to come out by the government at a national scale, right? So that the national government, the new monarchs, are going to set up these policies that are going to protect the government to control their own economic objectives, right? They're going to set up tariffs, which are taxes on any imports. So if, let's just say, England wants to buy something from France, right? They're going to put a tax on that, so it's going to be extra expensive if, let's say, I wanted to buy that French type of wine, right, as you see down here, okay? So if it's anything that is outside, imported from another country, it's going to be extra expensive because I want to protect the things that our country, our domestic products, okay? Another thing that was part of the protectionist policies was that the government's going to be targeting the poor and saying, you know what, we're going to stop you from begging and being unemployed and worthless in society. You're going to learn a new craft or some sort of skill, and we're going to establish poor laws that saying that you are forced to work, right? There is no bumming it on the street, begging for money. You're going to be part of a public works project. For example, you're going to start building roads for the government, and the government has that wealth to hire them and pay them just a little bit, just because they have that gold and silver coming in, right? Also building canals. That's another way to improve the economy for trade in that country, but at the same time putting the poor to work. So a few other features of mercantilism during the 1600s was just the idea of saying we're no longer going to just be giving away and exporting these raw materials because that's foolish, right? Essentially, we should create new manufacturing industries of, let's say, silk or woolens or even, woodworking, anything that they can make out of these raw materials. They should furnish it, right, manufacture it, and then export that product instead of just giving them the materials. If you give another country materials, right, essentially you are just giving them the ability to make more money off of you, and that's kind of dumb, right? So they're also going to use in these manufacturing industries skilled workers, and they're going to force those skilled workers to stay in their country and not allowing them to emigrate out of their country. Because if they, let's say, have a really talented skill, right, they might help the other country in that sense. So they're protecting it, okay? And so there's going to be a domestic kind of market, a national market created from all the merchants and the supplies of the laborers, okay? The navigation acts are going to be written up. Okay, for example, England is going to protect its colonies in its navigation acts for shipping, and said that you can only ship between England and its colonies. You are not allowed to go to another country like Belgium or Spain or France because they charge less, right? But you have to be loyal to us. And so basically there's going to be a monopoly of shipping and trading to colonies, and that's how they want to protect their own economy, okay? The establishment of monopolies, okay? You guys all know what a monopoly is. Essentially, that's a singular company. Monopolies are going to be created through charters, okay? So a charter is something that the government is issuing and saying that you are allowed to be an official company that represents our country. And usually they start off as joint stock companies. So I mentioned that in class that it's minimal risk, maximum profits in a joint stock company, and essentially you are allowing more capital, right, to be funded so that the farther and more expensive types of travel and trade can reap more profits, okay? So you have to buy shares, and let's say like I'm a 10% shareholder of the British East India Company, and so that means I get 10% of the profits because I'm 10% of the shareholder. I can sell my shares if I want to, or I can buy more shares. But essentially, monopolies are going to make a whole lot of money for these empires, for these countries, because over time, hey, if you're a monopoly, that's owning basically the entire industry of that thing, right? So you can have a monopoly on the cotton, right, or a monopoly on the tea, or the indigo, and that's what's going to happen in India, right? And so by allowing monopolies, no competition, just one company owning that, right, the countries are going to make a whole lot of money. In America, we have laws against monopolies, and so let's just say you have a patent, it's going to expire in, I think, like 10 to 15 years. So you cannot be a monopoly for too long, in a sense. Okay. All right. So England and France are going to be our number 1 and 2 examples for mercantilism. And one name you need to know is Jean-Baptiste Colbert. And Colbert is going to be what he develops a mercantilist economy in France called Colbertism. And as you remember, I mentioned in the Age of Exploration, you have the East India companies with the Dutch and with the British. Okay, even the French are going to have their own, and they are going to have their own markets in these colonies as well. Okay, last thing we're going to go over is the printing press. It's really important. Before the Gutenberg press came out, right, all education essentially was in the hands of the church, right? Education and learning was through Christianity, and so books were very costly because they were manuscripted, right? They were copied by scribes, and a lot of libraries were not very big. They were libraries were mainly found next to monasteries or churches and some universities, right? But as schools and literacy would increase, obviously the demand for books will increase, okay? And so businesses are also going to be looking to have manuals, right, and informational pamphlets, right? And so the desire to read and the ability to read is going to improve as well, which was going to generate the need for better printing methods, okay? It was established in 1450s in Mainz, Germany through Johannes Gutenberg, and the first book that is going to be printed is going to be the Gutenberg Bible. Okay, now he wasn't the first one to create printing, but he actually combined 2 technologies, which is the wine press technology, which is kind of like using a press with a screw down, right, to force an impression on something, but also the technology of the punch, right? And so to make an imprint, when you strike something against something, right, that's kind of like where that letter comes out, right? That is what the movable type is. So if you look in the upper right-hand corner of that picture, right, you have a bunch of different types, and they're put together so you can have kind of like words and then sentences formed, and this is going to really change society. He wanted to make a lot of money by supplying the Catholic Church with Bibles, and so over time he's going to start developing that. Before the press, the Gutenberg press was created, it was about a month to 2 months to copy one book, right? But now, after, you're going to see it takes only 1 week to produce 500 books, right? And so by 1500, there's going to be 15 to 20 million books being mass-produced, okay? By 1480, you're going to see that 110 towns are going to have these presses, and many of the writings that it's going to influence is the writings of Martin Luther, okay? So the Reformation is going to make a huge impact. Also, the impact of the Age of Exploration as well, okay, because the demand for books and the population is increasing. This is going to be a huge influence as why the printing press is going to be created. Okay, Luther's writings are going to be the most popular and the most published in the early 1600s. Luther's going to be around the early 1500s, so by the 1600s and about 100 years later, all of his work's going to be mass-produced, and then the Protestant Reformation is just going to blow up because of the printing press. All right, so the significance and impact, education, laws, science, languages are going to be standardized, right? And the intellectual community is going to be strengthened because of all of this. If you look at the bottom, you have a press print of the book of Genesis from the Gutenberg Bible. How much of an impact is the printing press? Well, Erasmus, which we're going to study, he's a Northern Renaissance humanist, and he says it's the greatest of all discoveries. Also, the printing press was what paved the way for the Enlightenment thinkers, right? And all of those those works to be mass-produced and read as well. Also, and this will end the monopoly of the clergy that controlled education, right? Also, you have vernacular literature that's going to be mass-produced as well, so people are going to learn that instead of just reading Latin. And scientists are going to get involved, and ultimately, the middle class will be the ones who are going to be mass-producing a lot of the printed material, Whereas before, what was actually manuscripted was whatever the upper classes would deem as important.